Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, May 30th, 2022, and in just a couple of months, we are going to get into the full general election season for the 2022 House elections with all 435 seats up for re-election this midterm year. What we are finding is that a significant portion of them have been already allocated to the Republican Party by a means of redistricting and based off of ratings from various political firms that have given us a general idea of what to expect in the midterm elections so early on. Even though many states have yet to declare their official nominees in many of these congressional districts simply on the account of the fact that we simply do not have all of the congressional districts solidified. New Hampshire is still finalizing and primaries are going to go as late as the end of August. What we are going to find so far is that we still have an idea of how districts are going to go simply based off of how they have been drawn by state legislatures, independent commissions, or whatever ultimately ended up proposing and finalizing these congressional maps. So what you can tell from the title of this video is that the Republican Party is undoubtedly ahead. They lead in the generic ballot. Joe Biden is disapproved of nationwide by 14 points, and everything seems to be gearing up this midterm year to be a red wave. And this isn't unordinary. This is exactly how we expected it to go once Joe Biden had won the presidency back in November of 2020. Now, I will say that on my front, I was a bit apprehensive about the Republican Party winning control of the United States Senate. But following the 2020 House elections, I knew it was a done deal in the House of Representatives. The Democratic Party only having a lead over the majority number needed of about 4 seats, meaning that if the Republican Party was to win just 5 seats from where they are right now, they would win the majority in the House of Representatives. And this is when I knew from this exact point, once all of these races were declared as finalized, the Democratic Party at 222, the Republicans at 213, that it would be a certainty that the GOP wins control of the House. I never doubted once that the GOP would be able to win control of the House, primarily because what we saw thus far was that congressional redistricting almost always favored the GOP. Even now, when it showed a brief period of time where the Democratic Party was having a number of victories in congressional redistricting, what we are finding is that now the GOP is exactly where they were in the old map. The Democrats slightly ahead, but when you take a look at the numbers, according to FiveThirtyEight, there really isn't much of a chance for Democrats, especially in 2022, to win the majority. The Republican Party being exactly where they were leading into the 2020 House elections makes this so much more difficult for Democrats to even hold on to a number of these seats. And based off of where we are with these new maps versus the old maps, Democrats might have increased their number of Democratic-leaning seats by just a very simple amount. I think about 6 seats here. I'm not super impressed by the result of the congressional redistricting for the Democratic Party. So the Republican Party absolutely is going to win control of the House, at least as it stands right now. There may be some very weird reality in which the Republican Party loses the House. The Democrats are able to maintain control, but that will be very difficult to see, especially following the 2020 House elections where the Democratic Party actually lost seats relative to 2018. And that might not necessarily come as a surprise to you specifically, but if you take a look at the election results from 2016. The Democratic Party, despite losing the White House, won 6 additional seats in the House of Representatives. Or if you take a look back at 2012, the Democratic Party gained seats. You take a look back at 2008, the Democratic Party gained seats. And the reason why this happens is because traditionally speaking, in presidential election years, the Democratic Party typically does better because turnout is higher. If you take a look at House elections, even going back, for the year 2000, the Democratic Party gained 1 seat relative to 1998. Not super impressive. You take a look at 1996 relative to 1994. The Democrats gained seats. Even if you go back to 1984, when there was a victory for Ronald Reagan, the Democratic Party might have lost seats, but they still hold on to a significant portion. My point being that in presidential election years, the Democratic Party typically does very, very well in the House of Representatives, especially relative to the national numbers. There is no reason why the Democratic Party should have gained 6 seats in 2016 when Donald Trump was effectively winning a trifecta for the Republican Party. They won control of the Senate, won control of the House, but the Democratic Party gained 2 Senate seats and 6 House seats. 2020 was the first presidential election in the 21st century that the Democratic Party lost seats in the House of Representatives, despite them winning an electoral trifecta, winning the White House, winning the Senate, and winning and maintaining control of the United States House of Representatives. So 2020 was definitely a turning point for the Democratic Party. I saw it and I recognized that this was not going to be good news for the Democratic Party. What we could have seen maybe in terms of the Democratic Party holding on to some of their seats is that they expanded beyond 2018. And that was expected, even by myself. I had predicted that the Democratic Party, incorrectly predicted, might I add, that the Democratic Party was going to gain seats in the House of Representatives because I didn't think that it would be possible for Joe Biden to flip numerous states from the Trump column: Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District, in addition to the Democratic Party picking up 3 seats in the United States Senate. What I found there alone was that despite all of this happening, in expectation of all this happening, I thought there was no way the Democratic Party lost seats in the House. It simply didn't make sense. But that's exactly what happened. The generic ballot looks like it was going to be the same, but ultimately it wasn't. These down-ballot Republicans significantly outperformed Donald Trump. Had the down-ballot Republican popular vote been applied to every single state and given to Donald Trump would have won the White House. There were many states in which Joe Biden won the overall vote in the state itself, but then the Republicans won the popular vote, or in the congressional races. Or if you take a look at some states where Trump barely won, for instance, in Florida, where he won by 3, or in other states where Joe Biden might have won, Republicans did significantly better than Donald Trump on this down-ballot race. So knowing all of this, they are now heading into the midterm elections with a revitalized energy against an incumbent president, this time not Barack Obama, but instead President Joe Biden. In addition to that, congressional redistricting did the Republican Party a favor. Now, I'm also not impressed by the way the Republican Party handled redistricting. I think it could have gone a lot better. The Democratic Party had control of maybe 80 to 90 seats when it came down to redistricting based off of partisanship alone. On partisanship alone for the GOP, on the other hand, they had control of about 190 seats. So about 100 seats in terms of the difference between Republican-controlled districts and Democratic-controlled districts in terms of congressional redistricting. Yet the Democrats ultimately came out ahead with more Democratic-leaning seats. So I think the GOP definitely made a bunch of mistakes in redistricting. I think they definitely stepped too far in their boundaries, maybe in North Carolina, as we will see in Ohio once they declared this new congressional map invalid, not for 2022, but for years beyond. So I think the Democratic Party and the Republican Party at this point are in a position where both of them messed up in redistricting, but the Democrats never really had high expectations, and the fact that they did better than their old maps does say a little bit about what the Democratic Party has done successfully, but I don't think it's enough at all to hold them on to the majority so far. So that sort of is just the background as to why I think the Republican Party is going to win control of the United States House. But like I said in the very beginning of the video, that political firms such as Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball, the Cook Political Report, and Inside Elections, they all agree that the GOP is in the advantage. Based off of this general consensus map, which you can find on 270towin.com, very well-known website, very informative. They give you a consensus map, which gives you an idea of what the 3 top firms that they utilize for these numbers are agreeing upon in these congressional races. Before we get into the actual nitty-gritty of the consensus map, we can look at some of these more individual maps because, again, it provides needed context and a needed understanding of how these races are expected to go. So this is the Larry Sabato Crystal Ball election prediction for 2022. So far, they have 213 seats for the GOP. For reference, the Republican Party won 200, and get this, 13 seats in 2020. The Democratic Party, while winning 222, is only at 193. This puts the Republican Party 5 seats away from winning control of the House, and the Democratic Party a lot more than just 5 seats. What you have for the Democrats is that they need to win over 20 seats at this point in order to win control of the House. They need to win 25 seats from where they are right now in this map to win control. The Republicans, on the other hand, only need 5. The Republicans start out with a very large advantage. 213 to 193 is not a good look for the Democratic Party. And considering where we are nationally speaking, the Democrats aren't exactly poised for victory in many of these toss-up races. Many of them have seen significant swings in terms of voter registration in favor of the GOP, or new congressional boundaries that now favor the Republican Party more. Many of them were competitive in 2020 and are expected to be competitive now, but I can only imagine a year that is much less favorable to the Democratic Party, that this competitiveness sort of means lean Republican or potentially even likely Republican. Where we are right now is that the Democratic Party is lagging behind the GOP tremendously, and many states the Democrats thought that they were going to succeed in, such as Ohio with the lawsuits there about the congressional map, they did not succeed in, and the Republicans ended up proposing a map third time that now gives the Democratic Party practically 2 seats out of of the total 15 in the state of Ohio, giving the Republican Party a 13-2 advantage in a state that typically votes about 55-45, or even worse for the Republican Party, 51-45 in favor of the GOP. Somewhere between 6 to 10 point victories are pretty standard for the GOP, but they also do have a Democratic senator who was reelected back in 2018. So what you are finding across I say that a lot, what you see in many of these states is that the Democratic Party simply did not do as well as they expected, and you see that reflected in the overall ratings. Now let's move on to the Cook Political Report. Not much changing relative to Larry Sabato's crystal ball, except the Democrats actually dropped down 5 seats, and the Republicans stay exactly the same. Like I said previously, the consensus is clear. The Republican Party has an undoubted advantage over the Democratic Party, and it is very, very substantial. What I see on this map is that the Democratic Party might have an opportunity to at least hold their own. What I have been predicting for quite some time now is that I expect a map that is similar to 2012 come to fruition following the November midterms. What I think will happen is the Democrats will hover around the low 200s, potentially lower, but I think low 200s is where I see it happening right now based off of redistricting and also a bunch of these candidate quality races where you might have not necessarily the best nominee in some of these individual races. Republicans at 233 would be bad for the Democratic Party, but it certainly wouldn't be as bad for them as 2014 was. I don't think we are in for a 2010 or 2014 type of election year. In 2010, the Democratic Party was at 193 and the Republicans were at 242. They had majorities in Nevada, they had majorities in Virginia, in Florida, states that Barack Obama had won 2 years prior. They had majorities in Colorado, another Obama state, even Obama's home state of Illinois, which is a solid blue state. 2014 rolls around, and you find a very similar story being painted. Republicans locked down Virginia, they locked down North Carolina, they locked down Ohio, locked down Pennsylvania, another Obama state, Michigan and Obama state, Wisconsin and Obama state, Iowa as well, Colorado as well, Nevada as well, Florida as well. These are all states that voted for Barack Obama in 2012, yet 2 years later completely pushed against the Democratic Party to a very high proportion. And this also didn't help with the fact that redistricting made it near impossible for the Democrats to hold on to many of these races. Realistically speaking, you take a look at the popular vote in the state of Virginia and you head over to the Wikipedia page here, the Democrats might have lost the popular vote by a margin of about 14 points. But a 14-point margin doesn't mean you're getting maybe 25% of representation in the state. That's not exactly where you should be. 40% of the popular vote should not translate to roughly 27% in the state of Virginia. And that's where you started to see the problem form of gerrymandering in favor of the GOP across the states. It took so far that the Democrats needed 8 years to win back the majority in the House of Representatives, and it looks like they're going to lose it just 2 years later. And this comes as a result of many factors, but it is something we can very easily predict and could have told you very early on. And I did say it immediately following Joe Biden's victory. The House was gone for the Democratic Party. They needed to expand their majority from 2018, and we knew, just based off of history, just based off of where we saw the trajectory of the nation, and also just everything told us this in terms of opinion polling data and where the Democratic Party was standing and where the Republican Party was standing nationwide, that the Republican Party was going to win control of the House. The question now lies, not will they win, but how much will they win by? And I have yet to see any real concrete forecast besides one from the racetothewhitehouse.com, where they do have a forecast as to how many districts and states are going to practically be governed and won by the GOP. Based off of this map right here, let's go ahead and see. They expect the Republican Party to gain many seats in states such as Arizona, Texas, and Florida. Across those 3 states alone, they expect the Republican Party to gain 7 seats. In addition to that, you have New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Maine, Ohio, Tennessee, Georgia, Wisconsin, Colorado, and Montana. 10 states that they expect the GOP to gain a total number of 1 seat individually and 10 seats across. Together, they expect the GOP to gain, alone based off of this, 17 seats from the Democratic Party. They expect Democrats to pick up 1 seat in Oregon, 1 seat in North Carolina, so that averages out to about a Republican plus 15 net gain, which is coincidentally near what they got back in the 2020 House elections. I also expect the margin to be a little bit higher than this. If you take a look also at this consensus map here, about 11 seats are expected to flip in terms of overall net gain for the GOP. I think 13 in total here, or maybe somewhere around 15. But my point is that the Republican Party only needed 5, and yet everything is telling us they are going to get, well, more than 5. The 2020 House elections set up the House majority for the GOP from the very beginning, because all they needed to do was do a little bit better than how they did in a year where the Democrats won a trifecta in the United States government. Redistricting does not help the Democratic Party by any amount. It does improve their number of Democratic favored seats, but keeps the Republicans about the same, which means all the Republican Party needs to do is win in similar and favored territory. Democrats are coming up from this bottom of the hill fight. You're looking at a map where the GOP is so close to the majority, just based off of where the districts lie. Meaning, if Democrats are to win control of the House in the future, it will come through Republican districts and Republican districts alone. There are not enough toss-up districts here to give the Democratic Party a majority through districts that are Democratic leaning. Many of these toss-up districts, almost all of them actually, have Republican favorites, and it does get a little bit trickier for Democrats in the future and immediately for 2022. The Republican Party still maintains their advantage, in fact, expands upon it, with Joe Biden falling further in approval and Republicans gaining in the opinion polls. We will see what happens. Crazier things have changed up American politics, but like I've been saying for the past year and a half, the Republican Party is still very much favored to win control of the House and flip this chamber of Congress from the Democratic Party. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.